All right, welcome to today's Qualified at the Intersection. So today is going to be a nuanced conversation. If you cannot tolerate nuance, leave now. Also, the conversation is going to have some imagery that may be upsetting. I'm going to be showing a talk by Dr. Joy DeGruy, a very small snippet where there is a Black man who has been hung. But the picture is the video and the discussion is really instructive. And I'm also going to be discussing self harm and suicide. So that is your disclaimer for this newsletter. If any of those things are things that you cannot deal with emotionally or you have reasons, then this is your disclaimer now. So I want to talk about all of the cases in a broad sense, and then specifically of Black people, which includes an adult woman, who have been in situations where they were either found deceased in a manner that Black people feel like doesn't make sense, or they were with white people before they died. I'm not talking about police shootings or anything like that. I'm just focusing on this group. There has been a lot of conversation on social media about these cases. And I'm going to put them into the categories of people found hanging, which with strange circumstances, which is not something generally we as Black people consider ways that we might kill ourselves or happen to us, and there are historical reasons. And then the two most recent-ish, one of them is older cases of Black people being with an all-white group and being the only person who ends up dead. Okay, so those are the two categories. So we know what we're discussing and we're not discussing. So the first case I want to bring to our attention, and I have some thoughts about all of this that I will get to, but I want to go through this in a way that is rooted in fact and reality, and because I think it's important. So first, I want to talk about the case of Xavier Nolan Wells. And I think a lot of you have heard of this case of Xavier Nolan Wells. He was the young Black man who was out with his friends for 4th of July, and they were on some kind of island, and they left the island on one boat, and they claimed he said he was going to come on another boat, and then nobody knew where he was, and then he was recently found deceased somewhere on this island. So what has been very triggering to a lot of Black people is this picture of Nolan with his white friends, and he is the only Black person in this picture. As far as we know, he's the only Black person in this group. We do not know if there are other people. I don't see them. The triggering part for Black people is rooted in this very, very deep distrust of being the only Black person around a group of white people. And I'm going to talk about why that is in a minute, and how I think that is related to our historical problems that still come with us today, right? So that is Xavier's, or I'm sorry, not Xavier. It's Nolan Xavier Wells. Xavier is his middle name. That is his case. Now, I want to show another case to you because I think it is important in this context. And this case is related to a woman. Actually, before I show this, let me get this case up here. Good. So I have, just want to make sure I'm sharing the right thing. So this is related to a woman who was at a sleepover with her friends, and very much like the picture that you see with Nolan, and this is just some writing here, but the family of 40-year-old, and I believe it is Tamla Horsford, Horsford. Yeah, Tamla Horsford. They said that she went to this adult sleepover at this house, and like I said, there is a picture, and getting all the sharing together, having it together is a little tricky. But there's a picture of her with with all of her, friends. And she is the only Black person in the picture. And as far as we know, she is the only person who is injured, and she comes up deceased as a result of being at this sleepover. Now, I want to talk about a couple things. First, I want to talk about. Oh, there you go. You can see that. So this is her picture with the sleepover, right? So she's the only person, very much like the picture of Nolan. She's the only person there. So she's the only person you see there in that case. And I want to go back because there is something about her case that I'd like to highlight with what I just had highlighted. And that is her injuries. And I'm just kind of moving through here because it's difficult to get all the pages together. But here it is. Her injuries are very interesting because, and I believe you can see this because I'm like streaming. Yeah, you can see this great. Her injuries were that she was found with head, neck, and torso injuries. They said consistent with a fall. She had lacerations to her heart, and a toxicology screening found anti-anxiety drug Xanax along with marijuana and a blood alcohol level of 0.238. That's 3 times the limit to legally drive. So the thinking there is, I guess, that she got so intoxicated somehow she wandered out of the house and died. Although the injuries sound fairly significant for a normal fall, right? So I want to just stop. Actually, no, I'm going to keep going. There's some other ones I want to talk about because I do think they are important. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to share again, and I'm going to talk about the fact that there has been over the last, I want to say, and I think News One is the group who've reported on this. Let me see. I'm looking at something I'm going to share with you all in a minute, but I think they have about 10 men and one woman who are alleged to have hung themselves. And I think this is from 2025. So I'm going to pull this one up so we can take a look at this one together, because to me it is very important as we talk about this that I ground this conversation in facts, that I'm not giving out hysteria, that I'm trying to I'm going somewhere with this, and I want to make sure that when we get there we all are there together, if that makes sense. I want to make sure we all get there together. So in any event, I want to bring this to the stage. So it is from News One, which is a Black news source. But Black people lynched in recent years. It says 10 deaths that shook the nation. And the deaths that they highlight are the deaths of, let's see, we have Dema Trayvon Trey Reed, who was a student at the University of Cleveland, Mississippi, who was found near pickleball court. And the strange thing about his case is he had broken legs and other injuries, which would have made it impossible for him to hang himself. But that was called a suicide. Then you had Javon McGee. He was a truck driver in Chicago, found near his truck in North Carolina with a rope around his neck. They claim it was a suicide. Once again, I mean, the authorities. Then there's Trevante Schubert Hilton. He's 29 years old, and he was found hanging from a tree in Georgia. Authorities quickly labeled his death a suicide. Family members said, I don't know about that. Then there's Denoris Richardson. He was found hanging in an abandoned house in Alabama. A private autopsy said that he died from asphyxia. Okay, we know that. They said it was impossible to conclude whether he killed himself or hung himself or if something else happened. Dominique Alexander from the Bronx was found hanging in Fort Tryon Park in New York. His death was ruled a suicide. A lot of questions people had. Robert Fuller, 20-year-old, was found hanging from a tree in Palmdale, California. A lot of people remember this case. It was initially ruled a suicide, but his family have raised questions. And Palmdale apparently, did do a deeper investigation, but nothing, as far as I know, has come of it. Malcolm Harsh, who was found hanging from a tree in Victorville, California, which is not, I don't know if it's that far from there, but questions remain about that. But there was video showing Harsh preparing to hang himself. So there was video of that. And then there's Earl Smith and Binghamton, New York. And he was a 58-year-old Black man found hanging from a tree in New York. The family said it wasn't a suicide. Authorities say it was a suicide. There was concerns. Then there's Yolna Lubrin, a woman who was found hanging from a tree in Orlando. Yo-Yo is what she goes by. Lubrin, found hanging from a tree in Orlando in 2023. Police ruled it a suicide, but the family said they jumped to conclusions. And then Omari Bryant, who was found hanging outside in Georgia. A lot of Georgia here. Authorities ruled his death a suicide, but there was a photo that showed the noose around his neck in the front of a motel. His feet seemed to be touching the ground. People thought that was not possible. Mississippi, there was a private investigation by a pattern in Mississippi of at least 8 Black people who had been found lynched since 2000, and each death was ruled a suicide. So that is kind of the situation with those, okay? So I wanted to lay this out because I want to kind of just hold the universe of what we're talking about. And I don't want to be hysterical or say things that aren't true or make ideas and suppositions that are not true. In at least one case, there was video of a person preparing to hang themselves, okay? So why are we here? Why is this a concern? Well, number one is the most obvious concern, that lynchings of Black people have been historically the number one way white supremacists inflict terror and fear in Black communities, is through lynching. It is something that obviously happened to other people. I tell the story about 11 Italian Americans who were lynched in New Orleans, and that is actually why we celebrate Columbus Day. So lynching definitely happened to other people, but lynching was definitely a tool of terrorism used late into the last century regularly for terrorizing Black people. And so for most African Americans, the idea that a Black person would willingly hang themselves, willingly lynch themselves, is very difficult to put their head around because it's just not something we assume we would do. And many of the circumstances, like the one case with the kid with broken legs, don't really speak to, well, how is that physically possible? Multiple things can be true at once. It can be true that some of the cases could be suicide. It could be true that some of the cases are, in fact, homicides. There's a heavy prevalence of these cases in Georgia. Many of the cases come from the South, which raises another layer of concern and fear, right? We have the case in Texas of Mr. Byrd, who was tied to a truck and dragged until he was nothing but pieces, right? And that was not in the 60s. That was in I believe it was the 80s, if I have that case right. But, that was a lynching, even though it was, he was tied to a truck. And so, these are complicated stories that haunt the Black imagination. And James Byrd, who was tied to the truck, and he had been beaten and chained and then pulled in a rotary, and that was 1998. Sorry, not 80s, 1998. So what we as Black people, I think, feel is that there is a cover-up of crimes committed against Black people, specifically these types of crimes, by authorities. So that's the hanging group. Now we have the death in the company of white people group. And why is that such a fear? This is such a fear for Black people because there is a deep distrust of being safe in white spaces, because being in white spaces, especially as the only one, many Black people have found that to be a triggering factor. You become an object of curiosity and of experimentation and of it's a peculiar situation. White people seem both peculiarly interested and also drawn in this very uncomfortable way toward you when you are the only Black person in a situation. And you also don't know the motivations of all of the people there. Like, one friend could have good intentions, but then they don't see their friends through a racial lens. So they bring you to a space that is, in fact, not safe for you. They didn't maybe know that or don't understand that. But then there's this power of the crowd, and crowds of white people have been very dangerous to Black people. And so there is a suspicion, this innate suspicion, and at the root of that suspicion is something deeper and older. And that is, and I've heard somebody on Instagram talking about this, but that there's a suspicion that Black people have that white people do not see us as fully human. And I've talked about that before, Black humanity. And because of that, there is people interact with us like they're interacting with a specimen and not a human. And so this lack of seeing us as fully human is frightening, for the very fact that when you don't see something as fully human, you may be inclined to do things to them that you wouldn't do to somebody you consider fully human. You might be inclined to excuse things done to them, and you may justify the violence. And this brings me to a video I want to share with you all that is a hard video to watch if are squeamish. It does have a picture of a man who has been hung, but I think it's an important video to share. It is by the scholar Dr. Joy DeGruy, who wrote about something she called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And post-traumatic slave syndrome is this idea that there's a genetic, epigenetic, psychological impact from hundreds of years of violence. And the idea that there isn't is interesting. Now, people call it pseudoscience, and some people are uncomfortable with it because it gets too close to eugenics. And eugenics says that Black people are fundamentally different than white people, and white people are better. Epigenetics says that because of the violence that has been done, I mean, Black people were enslaved just shy of 300 years. It's generations that violence changed us somehow. And it still reverberates in us, the fear, the worry, the concern, the pressure, the PTSD of it all. But there's another side to that. And Dr. Joy DeGruy is one of the few people I've heard speak to that. And that is, what did it do to white people? What did it do to white people to spend hundreds of years raping, torturing, experimenting on, and enslaving other human beings and displacing their humanity? And while slavery was abolished, we still had Jim Crow. And Jim Crow was essentially the same playing field, that Black people are not equally human. That's why you can't drink the water fountain. That's why they can't say they're as smart as you. That's why you use terrorism like lynching. So when people say, okay, well, slavery ended, but Jim Crow ended in my lifetime, right? So what does it do to white people, to the white imagination, to the white psyche? Sorry, my air conditioning came on. It is very loud. But what does it do to white people, to the white imagination, and to the white psyche to have done this? And what is communicated either on a cellular level or through what is spoken in the home, or even what is not spoken in the home? And I think almost every Black person has had this experience with white people where you think you have a genuine human relationship with a white person, and then you find out through conversation or some episode that no, they still see you as an experiment. I experimented with a black girl or with a black guy. I have a black friend. Look at me. But that's not like friendship. That's not like real friendship. And you find out that, like, oh no, I'm still a novelty, a curiosity, but not a humanity, not a human being, right? And so the question Dr. Joy DeGruy is asking in this video, which I ask you to sit with, is what was the result of that, and what happened to the children who witnessed that? So let's take a listen to this, and you can form your conclusions once you listen to what she has to say. Oh, sorry. Let me turn the sound on here.
Grimacing, like smirking. Now, remember, let's go back to the puppy concept here.
Okay.
I'm
actually going to start this over because it's really important that you hear the beginning. And I didn't realize the sound was not on, because when you're working on StreamYard, you're moving between different platforms at the same time. And also with this particular thing, it just starts going on Instagram before I could get over there. So let's reshare again. So I want to give you some background. This is a very famous picture. This is a picture of a young white girl, and there's even a younger child behind her, but you can't see her. It's a very famous picture. You can look it up. Who has witnessed the torture and hanging of a black man, and it is very brutal what she's standing there watching. And Dr. Joy DeGruy has some really relevant questions about what we're looking at and what the girl is looking at. So that's the little girl is looking up at the man who has been hung. So just so you have context.
Who's in the picture? I want you to look at this little girl in particular. You can't see her closely, but she's actually grimacing, like smirking. Now, remember, let's go back to the puppy concept here. She would be loathed and torn up probably if this was a puppy, which means he's less than that, because she's not disturbed. This little girl is not disturbed by this, but she should be, shouldn't she? People always ask me, they go, Joy, what was the impact on white people? There it is, right there. Can't feel any empathy for him. None, zero, zip. There's a little one back here, even smaller. Because whatever she's been taught or told, socialized to believe, makes him no longer human. That's the greatest danger to white people, is that they can't feel it. And there's a reason why white people can't feel what we're talking about. My God, what would you then feel? It's tough. So I've got to believe, oh, it's all over now. It's not my fault. I don't benefit. It's not a big deal. Let's move on. It's not all of those things. But we don't say that to Jewish people. I dare you. But you have to understand, when you unearth this one, that's what we did to our children.
All right. So why is that important for me to share with you? It's important for me to share with you because for Black people, we have lived in a state of violence where white people have been enactors of violence on us. And we are concerned and we believe that a large majority of white people have been acculturated in this culture of violence toward us, do not in fact see us with any empathy. So when we are in spaces where it's just us and them, they are, as Black people might say, subject to do anything to you because they're foundational somewhere in the historical record does not ultimately categorize you as human. And she had earlier given an example of a puppy, like a puppy, like people would be horrified if somebody was hanging a puppy. Like little girl would be crying, tears would be coming out of her eyes. What did that do to a child who was raised in that, who then raised her children and then raised her children and raised her children's children's children, right? What does that do? How does that change her? And how does that change people? Now, there are people who witnessed, lynchings who did have impact. Jane Fonda's father, Henry Fonda, tells a story of witnessing a lynching in Nebraska. And he was forever changed by that. And it may have a lot to do with how his daughter was changed. I'm not saying that every white person saw this and agreed, but we lived in a culture of overwhelming violence toward Black people for hundreds of years. Black people were experimented on without anesthesia. We talk a lot about the experimentation that happened during the concentration camps, which was horrific, and it did happen. But we say nothing of the hundreds of years of medical experimentation on Black bodies, specifically Black women, without anesthesia for hundreds of years. So this concern is that these stories, this cellular change, this cultural milieu ends up on the boat with Nolan Xavier or with Tamla at the sleepover, and that turns into some sort of animalistic, ritualistic rage toward you, or curiosity towards you, or joshing that starts to have an edge, starts to become violent towards you, that comes from somewhere inside. And that is the fear that Black people are expressing when they are talking about these murders, that these murders, the hanging murders, lynching murders, are actually rooted in real crime. And the murders amongst white people as the only person are rooted in that little girl, that ability to watch our pain and not really feel it, and not really trust it, and not really see us in a human way, right? I mean, the question I find interesting is, and maybe there's some data, but I don't know data of how many white kids who are among all Black children who've come up dead. I would be interested in any data anybody has on that. But Black people, we have the reverse from an epigenetic perspective and from the impact of that. You would think the impact of all that would be that Black people just have an overwhelming hatred of white people, which some Black people do and some legitimately may have. But oddly, what happened is, because we were in a live or die subservient position with white people from the time we were enslaved, is that we actually learned discernment of white people. We learned to see white people in all these different ways, because we are observers, quiet observers who couldn't say anything, lest you be murdered for saying your opinion. But we could see, and we actually, because we were forced into service to care for their children, develop empathy. And I actually would argue that Black people have a better handle on white people's humanity than white people do their own. And but it's not a two-way street. It doesn't go both ways. That's not to say that Black people cannot act in inhumane ways toward white people, because they absolutely can, and toward each other. But as a general rule, I often think about the case where the white police officer shot the Black man in his house. I don't know if you remember, there's a woman police officer. And the Black sheriff deputy, when the woman was sentenced, she just ran out and hugged the white woman, just hugged her. She had just been convicted of murdering this Black man. And people were like, oh, she's such a mammy. She says this and that. There is something to that conditioning, that hundreds of years of conditioning for Black people to see white people fully has a result in how we interact with white people. And that is probably the biggest distinction. Whereas white people think that if Black people are given authority and leadership, we're going to do to them as they've done to us, and we're going to feel about them the way they feel about us. That is generally not the way Black people conceptualize things, because we are culturated and our epigenetics and our story lead us to different conclusions about each other. The way everything in the United States has been designed is designed to lead white people to the conclusion that Black people are inhumane animals who you can inflict all kinds of horrific pain on, and it's not your fault. The way Black people have been socialized is white people are these violent people who've done horrible things, but also their humanity exists in the care for their children and our love for being part of their world. And our, it's a complex psychological thing over here, right? So I think this is the disconnect. So I'm going to say that about that. And like I said, this was going to be nuanced and long. So now I want to talk about something else that worries me and concerns me about the hanging conversations, the conversation where people have been hung. Or I'm not so much talking about this as it relates to the incidents of being the only Black person in the room, because those cases shake out a little differently. But there is something that we as Black people are missing, and that is that things have changed for young Black people. So while I do not believe all of those 10 cases News One showed were real suicides, I mean, broken legs and strange conversations, I think there are definitely people harming Black people, men and women, and using those historical tactics because they're still in our blood, they're still in our system, and they've never been excised or accounted for in this system. So I believe that. But I worry about the conversation that Black people don't hang themselves, or Black people, aren't going to commit suicide in that way or that type of thing. I am speaking from very personal experience, having had experience working with young people who have severe mental health issues, who are Black, who are early millennial, borderline. No, they're like early millennials, right? And I have had to intercede with young Black people who sought to hang themselves, who sought to kill themselves, suicide by cop, and a whole host of things. I know for a fact that young Black people are hurting, and they are in fact committing suicide at higher rates than we acknowledge, and in ways we would have thought unthinkable. And so what I don't want to happen in this conversation is that we somehow wipe away the fact that there is a mental health crisis, probably more than likely impacted by the weight of racism and the confusion that young people deal with, as well as social media and a whole host of other issues that has fueled higher suicide rates for young Black youth than we talk about and discuss. And the way we talk about it for young Black people in these cases makes it seem like young Black people either don't commit suicide or don't die by hanging. And that's not true. I just want to show you this article because I do think it's important to share because we have to be careful and not to just bowl over this issue. And then see if I can get this. There we go. So I'm going to bring this online here in just a second, because I really want to do this in a way that is based in fact, not just what I said. So young Black men are now dying by suicide at a historic rate. And a lot of this has to do with race. It has to do with race-based limitations and running up against that, and the resiliency that they have. Here's the figure that I was looking for. And I don't know if you can see this here, but because the print is kind of small, but it says that Black boys and young men ages 16 to 29 are dying at a suicide rate that is higher than white boys and young men despite the fact that across all age groups, white men are nearly twice as likely to die by suicide than Black men. So Black boys and young men. The overall suicide rate for Black Americans went up 53% from 2014 to 2024, 10 times faster than white people and twice as high as Latinos and Native Americans. Now, one might say that that is the inevitable result of this consistent and constant weight, this vice grip of racism and race that Black people find themselves in, and that younger people are less resilient. And we, as Black people, have been very different about how we raise children in this world. And so they don't always have the tools to manage it, and they shouldn't have to. It's not their fault. It's not our fault. We live in this world and the pain that that causes. But I will say, given my age group, I was instructed early on that this was going to be a bitch, that this was not going to be easy, that this was going to be incredibly hard, that I was going to come up against these things. And this was helpful for me psychologically, so that when it did happen, I did not blame myself. I understood contextually what was happening. It didn't make it any less easier. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made my mental ability to process it better. That we shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't have to live like that. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's great. I'm just saying. And I think, and I can speak for myself and the young people I have had relationships with and have relationship with, they do not have that same kind of mental toughness. And the pains of all of this are devastating them in a way that is difficult for us who've been in a suffer cycle to really appreciate. So I'm just saying this not to discount the suspicious hangings, because they are in fact quite suspicious. I'm saying this because I worry about a conversation that says Black people do not hang themselves, because I know for a fact they do. And I'm worried about a conversation that says Black people are not killing themselves, when in fact Black people are. I have interceded several times to try to keep Black folks who I know from killing themselves. So I know for a fact that is true. But at the same time, it can be true that some of these deaths are incredibly suspicious. That's the hanging deaths. The deaths of people amongst white people are the most suspicious, really, in a lot of ways, outside of the people with broken limbs who couldn't possibly hang themselves, or people who randomly stop somewhere and are hung. I think we can suss that out. These deaths are perhaps deaths of negligence. Maybe the woman at the sleepover was very drunk and fell somehow. I know one thing: Black people do not, it's just like people talk about Asian Americans or Asian descendant people don't process alcohol the same way white people do. Black people don't process alcohol. White people can drink in a way that is very different than most Black people can. They can drink and take Xanax and things of that nature. People say, oh, have a Xanax. I would never do that. I don't have the ability to metabolize things like that. So could it be that she was at this party and doing things with these people that she physiology was not able to do, and then she went out and fell or something? I don't know. That's possible. But it also could be that something happened, because we are in a situation where there is a lack of fundamental trust, and there is a historical impulse toward a lack of humanity toward Black people from white people. There's a historical impulse that way. That in the United States, that is not a historical impulse. You know, the slave revolts that happened in the United States, and there were slave revolts where Black folks did kill, the enslavers. But first of all, you're not on your native ground. Where are you ultimately going to go? Like, how is that really going to work out for you? So Black people are kind of pushed into a situation where our instinct toward white people was designed differently, right? It's just differently. And so, like I said, if there are cases of young white people or white people in general with Black friends who comes up dead, I don't know of those cases. I'm Googling because I want to see in case there are, these cases, so and so was out with their friend and then she came up dead. I don't know of these cases. And that is because Black people inherently know that this white kid better come home. If I got this white kid with me, this kid better come home. Because if this kid don't come home, I'm in trouble. So this is the emotional historical story manifesting in different ways, right? Generally, Black people, if they have a white friend with them, dude, they're going to intercede. They're going to do what's necessary to make sure that person is safe and that person gets home and that their hands are clean from having had them with them. White people have a very different calculation when they're with Black people, right? When the Black person, white people are incredibly oblivious to the racism of their friends, family, and other people, and I have been put in situations by white people that were not safe, but they are oblivious. I mean, the perfect example is I went to a birthday celebration in a state, and the host was hosting a Black person's birthday party with all Black people, and thought it was a great idea to take us to a rodeo that had a huge MAGA sign outside. We are the only Black people in the entire rodeo space. We go up to this VIP area, and I feel like the announcer must have seen us because the announcer played different music like they do at a rodeo. And he played a Mary J. Blige, and he said, "Doesn't that just make you feel like you should worry that your car just got broken into?" Right? So the host, the young white person who hosted this birthday and with all these people, seemed to be oblivious that this was not a safe place to take a bunch of Black people, because white people have a sense of themselves. And I got to plug up my computer here because I've been talking a minute. But white people have a sense of themselves and their friends and family as safe. White people do not have a sense of the violence, the level of violence they have enacted upon other people. And they do not see it or feel it, right? So, what would make somebody take a group of Black people to something like that? What is wrong with you? But that's where we were, right? So I have been put in unsafe situations by white people in a way I would never to put a white person in an unsafe situation like that who was with me. I would know 100% if it was safe for them to be there. What I would know that, right? Because this is just a different impulse. So this is very long. I know it's like a lecture, but this required it. I am not one of these people who's going to do just a short little video on this and be like, oh, I think this happened and that happened. No, it is complicated. It is all very complicated and it needs to be spoken of. We need to do inquiries. We need to have real justice for that hanging group, the group of people found hanging, many of whom there are real questions as to what the hell happened to them. We need to acknowledge the fact that there has been an explosion of suicides among young Black people, specifically young Black men, where they are killing themselves in a variety of ways. We need to ask questions about what the hell happens when one Black person is with white people that doesn't happen when one white person is with Black people. What is the problem here? How is this? What is the issue? And we still need to wrestle with the fact that white people for hundreds of years have been acculturated to our lack of humanity, and what that takes from white people, what it puts us in danger in our interactions, and what a restoration could look like. It takes James Baldwin to really talk about that cost. There is this part in the documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, and I wish I had it up and available because it is one of the most powerful things that I've ever seen. And he talks about the cost to white people, the cost to white people for their violence, the cost to white people in this kind of hysterical world or life that they live. It is incredibly, incredibly powerful scene. And it is so important. I actually want to see if I can find it real quick because I can look through the transcript here and see if I can find it. But it is one of these things where it's the cost to white people for the prosperity they have, it's, I don't know. I'm trying to find it because I just think it's so important. And if I could find it, I would love to find it. But I don't know. If I find it, I'll put it up as a separate piece if I can find it. Oh, I found it. Oh, I found it. So we can watch it. Yay. How about that? I'm pretty handy with this. But yeah, so it really is this little section about the cost of the prosperity, the cost of what it has cost white people to do the things they've done, to Black people, to make their lives this lives where they can pretend what isn't true. So yeah, I'm going to bring this video in and we're going to take a little listen. This will be the last thing before I let you go. I know you're like, oh my God, I did not plan to stay here all day with this newsletter, but this is what it is.
For a very long time, America prospered. This prosperity cost millions of people their lives. Now, not even the people who are the most spectacular recipients of the benefits of this prosperity are able to endure these benefits. They can neither understand them nor do without them. Above all, they cannot imagine the price paid by their victims or subjects for this way of life. And so they cannot afford to know why the victims are revolted.
Kill the girl! Kill the girl now!
This is the formula for a nation or kingdom decline. For no kingdom can maintain itself by force alone.
So that is from a piece from the documentary called I Am Not Your Negro, which is about James Baldwin. And he also in there talks about like the almost kind of hysteria and the emotional cost of this disconnection that white people have, which we do see in high suicide rates of white people. Specifically, they call it deaths of despair, which is interesting because they have a whole thing about deaths of despair for white people, but they don't talk about the deaths of despair for Black people, right? So anyway, this is long. This is nuance. This was necessary. This is not a conversation to have glibly. There are people doing that. They have their hot takes. God bless them. If you haven't made it to the end and you judged from the start, you may not have liked this and that, but it's necessary. And so this is what I submit to you.